Audiophile conversations are often subjective and can lead to a lot of misinterpretations. But did you know that there's an established official vocabulary? There are 56 terms that are objectively defined for us audiophiles. Please follow me today as we review these 56 official terms. Welcome to the Bast Audiophile with your host, the Bast, an audiophile. According to the International Telecommunication Union, ITU, in their publication Methods for Selecting and Describing Attributes and Terms in the Preparation of Subjective Tests in 2017, there are 56 terms which audiophile and audio professionals should agree upon. The goal is to build a consensus vocabulary, a lexicon of objective terms attributed to the subjective matter of sound reproduction. In other words, if we don't agree on the terms, we're just gonna have disagreements. Other initiatives are to be noticed as well. One in particular is the absolute sound. On their website, there's an extensive list of words as well. But for now, we will focus on the ITU list. They're the professional union, since they have integrated all the terms as part of a system as well. They divide sound into 6 dimensions: loudness, dynamics, timbre, spatial, transparency, and artifacts. Quick note, these terms are aimed at audio professionals, meaning people who record sound, people who mix songs, and people who master soundtracks. So basically, these 56 terms describe the sound at the source. I'm sorry it's going to be long and hopefully not too boring. I thought about it and I couldn't find any other way but to simply read them to you, one by one. That will require a small effort of attention from you, but many of these words you probably know already, so it's gonna be easy. This video will take a lot of time, but less than a university class. So gather your attention, make yourself comfortable, and let's review these 56 terms one after the other. These terms refer to the electromagnetic wavelength spectrum that we've reviewed on episode 77, 10 tips to take care of your audiophile ears. During that episode, we saw that the sub-bass starts at 20 Hz, up to the top high frequencies of the treble that ends at 20,000 Hz, with the mid-range starting at 250 Hz and ending at 4,000 Hz. Now that we've had an overview of the frequencies, we can start reviewing the audiophile glossary. So let's start with the letter A. The first word is airy, a spacious and open sound in the high treble, from 11,000 Hz to 20,000 Hz. Number 2, analytical, a bright sound that's very detailed, ensures that vocals, instruments, and sibilants stand out from the mix. However, some people find this sound fatiguing. Not every word is positive, you'll notice. Articulate, clear vocal and instrument detail. Number 4, bassy, emphasized bass from the low bass to the low mids, 20 Hz to 500 Hz. Mixes have an extra thump, punch, and boom, good for bass heavy genre like electronic dance music and hip-hop. Number 5, balance, related to tuning the sound profile. When a sound is well balanced, all frequencies ranges have similar levels, and one range doesn't dominate the other. Second definition, related to the soundstage, refers to how centered the soundstage is. Sound is well placed and isn't skewed to the left or right. 6, bloat, excessive amplitude around the high bass to low mid at 250 Hz. It isn't very pleasing to the ear since it negatively affects the presence of vocals and instruments. Boomy, excessive amplitude around the mid and high bass at about 125 Hz. Some people may like this when it comes to gaming since it can help emphasize sound effects like gunshots, but some people don't. Number 8, boxy, an overemphasis around low mids from 250 to 500 Hz. This sound has resonances, as if the music is enclosed in a box. Bright, overemphasized response in the treble range. It's not necessarily bad, it can help make vocals and instruments sound clearer in the mix. Cool, the progressive attenuation of frequencies below the high bass at 150 Hz. Mixes lack body and warmth and sound light on bass. So cool is not necessarily nice. Clean, Audio with clear and accurate reproduction of vocals and instruments. There isn't distortion or compression artifacts. Clear, clarity. Adequate high-mid to low treble from 1000 Hz to 5000 Hz. Detail like the articulation of woodwind instruments are easy to hear in the mix. Cluttered, related to muddy. An overemphasis of low-mid from 200 to 500 Hz that makes the mix sound less clear. Clipping. Distortion artifacts like a hiss, click, or skip that are overly pronounced in your audio. It usually occurs when you push your audio too loud. Compression artifacts. Noise that appears when there's too much dynamic range compression. The greater the difference in frequency response between moderate and high volume, the more likely you are to experience compression artifacts, like bumping and hissing. Dark and dull. Underemphasize low treble from 2000 to 5000 Hz, creating a tonal balance that tilts downwards. This results in vocals and instruments that lack detail and clarity. 17. Delicate. A smooth treble range extending to the high treble from 15,000 to 20,000 Hz without peaks. The treble is pleasing to the ear. 18. Detail. The delicate and subtle parts of the audio, like how an instrument reverberates in a room or a musician breathing. Detail is related to an adequate low treble from 2000 to 5000 Hz, which isn't overemphasized. Depth. The perceived distance of sound away from the listener. A lot of depth makes sounds feel like they're coming from around you. When the depth is shallower, audio feels like it's coming from inside your head. 20. Distortion. Unwanted frequencies that play simultaneously as desired frequencies, usually as at high volume. This results in an unclear and impure sound. Examples of distortion are clipping and hissing. 21. We're approaching the middle. Forward. Overemphasized mid-mid from 500 to 1000 Hz. This pushes vocals and instruments to the front of the mix, above the rest. If there's a lot of overemphasis, it can also sound aggressive. Full or full-bodied. Strong fundamentals relative to harmonics. Adequate mid-bass to low-mid, around 100 to 300 Hz response. Male vocals, for instance, feel full in the high bass range, around 125 Hz, while female voices and some instruments like violin are full in the high bass to low-mid, around 250 Hz. 23. Gentle. The treble range is a bit underemphasized or not exaggerated. The underemphasis isn't enough to weaken the details of vocals and instruments, but it rounds off their edges. 24. Hard. Too much overemphasis in the low treble around 3000 Hz, which makes the upper harmonics of vocals and instruments much more present and detailed compared to the rest of the response. Harsh. Peaks in the low and mid treble around 2000 to 6000 Hz. The upper harmonics of vocals and instruments have overemphasis details and articulation which is unpleasant to hear. Hissing. A kind of distortion artifact that sounds like sizzling noise. Hollow. A recessed mid-range that negatively hurts the presence and clarity of vocals and instruments, making them sound thinned out and pushed to the back of the mix. Hunky. Overemphasize mid to high mid from 500 to 2000 Hz range. Vocals and instruments are pushed forwards in the mix, further emphasizing their intensity and clarity. Okay, congratulations, we've passed the middle of the video. Laid back. Slightly underemphasized mid-range, making vocals and instruments less present and clear in the mix. This can be desired when paired with a strong bass. The term is also related to hollow, which is more extreme and negatively hurts the presence and clarity of vocals and instruments. 30. Lush. Strong mid-bass to low-mid, around 100 to 300 Hz. It's pleasing to the ear as bass, like drums, sound full-bodied and warm. Mellow. Slightly underemphasized high frequencies, but doesn't completely weakens the vocals and instruments or sibilants. Vocal and instruments still sound present but soft. Muddy. Overemphasized bass, which negatively affects vocals and instruments, rendering the mix unclear. Muffled, weak high frequencies. Vocals and instruments in the treble range lack detail and clarity, making them unclear and fuzzy. Narrow, the perceived lack of distance of sound in the soundstage. It feels like instruments come from around the same place, which doesn't feel as immersive or 3D. The opposite of this term is wide. Nasal, a bump in the mid around 600 Hz, pushing forward vocals and instruments ahead of the rest of the mix. Natural, realistic or true-to-life sound. You can use this term to describe any sound that's accurately reproduced, but tends to be used around vocals and instruments in and around the mid-range. 37. Open. First definition. Relating to the soundstage. The depth and width of sound. Second definition. Relating to the space between instruments. A perception of white space between instruments helps them sound more distinct in the mix. Piercing, narrow peaks in the low and mid treble around 3000 to 10,000 Hz. When you hear piercing, it can hurt to hear. Punchy, first definition. Overemphasis in the high bass, around 200 Hz, which makes the fundamentals of most instruments stand out. Second definition, overemphasis between the low to mid treble, around 5000 Hz. The upper harmonics of vocals and instruments are detailed and crisp. 40. Presence. Dependent on the low to mid, around 220 Hz to 1000 Hz. Vocals and instruments that are clearly defined in the mix and aren't cluttered by other sounds. Pumping. Caused by compression. This noise makes audio content quickly louder than quieter. Recessed. When a range is underemphasized compared to the other ranges. Reverb or reverberation, sound that continues even though the audio source has stopped. Roll-off usually occurs at the beginning or at the end of the frequency response, as it tapers off and becomes underemphasized. Bass roll-off can cause tracks to feel light on thumb, rumble, and boom. In contrast, a treble roll-off makes mixes sound veiled and dark. Okay, that's for your subwoofer. Rumbling. Balanced low bass, 35 Hz range and below. Genre like electric dance music and hip-hop produce these sounds, which can be mostly felt and not heard. That's what happens when you feel it in your whole body on your chest. 46. Shrill. Very sharp middle treble around 5000 to 10,000 Hz, which makes sibilants like S and T sounds painful to hear. Sibilant. Related to the sibilants, which are a kind of consonant with high amplitude and pitch like S and T sounds. This sound quality comes from an overemphasized mid-treble around 5000 to 10,000 Hz, making sibilants like cymbals sound piercing. We've seen that word before. Smooth. A flat response, especially in the mid-range, where vocals and instruments reside. This sound is easy on the ears. Sparkle, overemphasized treble response that feels energetic and positive. Sweet, flat treble response with low distortion. No peaks in the response so it doesn't feel piercing or harsh. We're close to the end. Thumpy, overemphasized low bass, 35 Hz range and below. It's mostly felt rather than heard. Timbre, the sound quality of a note. Veiled, recessed low treble, around 2000 to 5000 Hz, which weakens the details and clarity of vocals and instruments, making them sound softer and rounder. Warm, less emphasis on the treble range, but more emphasis in the high bass to mid-range. Warm mixes pack extra bass without completely overwhelming vocals and instruments. When there's too much warmth, it can start to sound dark since overemphasis the bass and mid-range is much more prominent than the treble range. Weighty. Good frequency response in the low bass, below 50 Hz. A sense of substance pronounced by deep and controlled bass. That's a good word, weighty. Wide. How wide the soundstage is perceived. A wide stage helps separate sounds and makes audio, like instruments and sound effects, seem more immersive, as they feel like they're coming from around you rather than from in front of you. The opposite term is narrow. That's it. That was the 56 terms defined by the ITU. You now know the terms and can recognize many of them on the wheel presented right now in front of you. Remember that there's 6 dimensions of sound: loudness, dynamics, timbre, spatial, transparency, and artifacts. Let's take a second to appreciate this system. A full method to communicate about sound. Thank you again for your presence up to the end. We're looking forward to see you in our next video. All the best. See you soon.